Our next speaker, Peter Bentley. Peter is the founder and the managing director of Intuitive Recovery. Peter wrote the Intuitive Recovery course, started teaching IR in January 2005, having successfully beaten his addiction and ended years of using. Intuitive Recovery now provide a service across the UK, taught by paid employees who themselves have set the course and beaten their own addiction, ensuring that the people who've been there and done it are teaching others this simple but highly effective method of beating addiction. I'm delighted to welcome Peter to come and talk to you today about what he does. Peter.
Well, you lot are all terrifying, and how I follow those two is I'm not quite sure. So I suppose in having gone through treatment myself in Manchester, what formed Intuitive Recovery was in large part to sort my own problem out. I did, in the good old stubborn way that people often do, the exact opposite than I was advised. And I kind of found it worked. So having got that problem sorted, I sort of scratched my head and thought, well, why aren't these sort of pathways available in our existing treatment services, and how can we get them in there? Intuitive recovery, in very large, broad terms, comes from what I'd call a self-recovery method. And there's many, many, many of those in the world. But the heart of all self-recovery, I think, is this core responsibility. And it's the belief that recovery from addiction is the sole responsibility of that addicted person. This belief that it was my fault. Whatever may happen to us in the world, we have the power to react to it in various different ways. And that is the inherent power that every individual has on the planet, actually. So it's not a finger wagging, this is my fault, but if we fail to take responsibility for our decision to use, what we're really saying is that we can't take responsibility to change. If it happened to us, not by us, then we're really up the old proverbial creek, aren't we? So it is my fault, therefore I can change. And underpinning that is this core philosophy. And I think this is largely true, but the ultimate aspiration for any person who has been seriously affected by their experience with pretty much any substance or behaviour is that they can achieve and maintain permanent and planned abstinence through self-reliance. It's the fact that the abstinence, the plan to never use again, is delivered by I. I'm not saying we don't engage with support, and I will still do that regardless of those external factors. So it doesn't matter what happens in front in our lives, because those weren't the reasons we used to use anyway. We used really pretty much for the pursuit of pleasure, that pursuit of that hit. So some core beliefs that sit behind intuitive recovery. I think paradoxically, addiction, I think, is a sign of health. Now that's quite a statement, isn't it? That's an odd statement in some respects. But the thoughts, feelings and attitudes that build up that are pro-using, the excuses, if you like, the eternal playing cards, the rationale for further use, is an utterly predictable response to your past behaviour. And as such is the sign of a brain operating how we would expect it. You know, if I start using heroin for the next month, I'll start picking up attitudes that are pro and justifying further use of heroin. So right at the centre of intuitive, we're saying there's nothing wrong with you. And I think that's a wonderfully empowering statement. And certainly I'll never forget being told I had a disease that did the exact opposite. It was like a body blow. There's nothing inherently wrong with you. The skills you use are extraordinary. The planning you use and to maintain that lifestyle are extraordinary. And all we do with intuitive is trying to turn that round, really, to use that innate skill of that individual, the thing that's kept them alive, to now put that down with a more positive outcome for that individual. So going on from there, we also believe absolutely that addiction is a choice, not an affliction or a disease. And certainly I would take some issue with some of the language that sits around our treatment system, but also in parts of recovery as well. We don't mean by that people say, do you know what, I'm going to get addicted. Of course we don't. But prior to every single episode of using, there is the weighing up internally of the pros and cons, the should I, shouldn't I, can I, can't I. And that, again, is the very essence of a person's strength. That's the thing you can always influence. Always influence. Very essence of choice, really. Nobody can lock it up. Nobody can take that away from you. But with that choice becomes the responsibility. We live by the outcomes of our actions. And I think it's really important. So much of treatment, less so now actually, but so much of treatment takes away responsibility. It disempowers because we say, it's not your fault. And I don't think that's helpful. Coming off the back of that, of course, we're also saying it means that anybody can stop and stay stopped. Giving up and staying stopped was the easiest thing I've done in my life. Compared to continued use, it's been a doddle. And it certainly hasn't been a journey. It hasn't been a trail. It hasn't been hard work. None of those things. So much easier than continued use. And yet, why do we listen to this opinion or this voice in the head that suggests it has to be like climbing Everest? Because it just ain't. So anybody can stay stopped and stay stopped. And I do think, despite the very eloquent George there, that recovery, in essence, I look on as an event. It's the decision to change. Absolutely critical in that. The decision to change that only that individual can ever take. And the rest, the process, isn't that just life? Aren't we just joining people who have a host of other problems? And it does worry me that we build recovery communities that still have barriers to colleges, education, family, etc., that sits outside that. So I think the rest is just life, isn't it? With all its ups and downs. So yeah, make a decision to stop and change, and you'll find that things in your life start changing. Perhaps more controversially, there is a point at which ongoing support becomes a negative, not a positive. And I should underline that as a personal view, but one I hold very dearly. I wrote Intuitive Recovery because all I was offered was kind of ongoing support in its widest form. And when I went to those meetings, I felt worse, generally. But also, what I found we were doing was re-justifying what I used to do. And I think that is unhelpful as such. All I've done is stop being an arsehole, really. And that's dead important. There's a line in the sand with this plan to never use again. I couldn't look my kids in the eye and say, I'll try not to relapse, because that ain't good enough, given what I did. So intuitive recovery actually is a simple plan to never use again. The voices go, never say never, you can never do that, can you? But the world is full of people who've done just that. Full. But they don't hang around our treatment systems and support groups. Why would they? They put down and they get on. And I think that's really important. If our view of addiction, both for our customers and the service professionals in it, is that we see in treatment, we're probably seeing 10%. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's tiny. It's tiny. And we imagine that nobody stops, and that just ain't true. That just ain't true. So it's a simple plan to use, wherever you are with, or whoever you are with. Armed with that skill, and I think that is a skill, I can go anywhere. And I don't buy that I relapse. If I buy the concept that I have a chronic relapsing condition, logically I should do it again. Because otherwise I prove myself wrong. I think the same stacks up for the concept that I have a disease. If I buy that, I should go use again. Because otherwise I prove myself wrong. I don't think it helps. And I certainly think we need alternative voices in there. So what we do, all delivered by people who've done our course, they've put down using the tools, and we now teach that in a classroom environment. They're simple skills, actually. It's the same skill that we use in using, that we use in not using, ironically enough. It's only the decision that changes. It's a non-medical model, unashamedly. I think there are various areas of behaviour that we have begun, certainly in the Western world, as treating as a medical issue, and I think they are largely unhelpful. It's not a medical issue. We behave in a certain way. We learn these habits. We learn these things, these methods of operating, which of course also means we can unlearn them. We can learn new ones. You ain't a victim. You never were. You have inherent in every individual is that responsibility of how I react to the world. Nobody can take it off you, and don't let them. We're an accredited programme, accredited to the Open College Network, and that is important for many of our learners. But I think more importantly, it makes sure that if you get intuitive recovery in Croxteth, Liverpool, for instance, it's exactly the same as the one you're going to get in Ealing, in Wales, in the Midlands, wherever we're operating. And I think that's really important. You'll get intuitive recovery taught. Different tutors have different styles, but the coursework is all the same. And that control in a safe environment is really important, I think. As I said, it's a classroom setting. It's almost old school, actually. We move unashamedly, desks facing one way, big nice board, we're here to learn. It's 10 hours of learning. People say to me, well, how can you sort anything in 10 hours? And of course, I think the question is utterly wrong. It's got nothing to do with us, actually. People come to us for a cure, or anywhere, it will fail straight away. This is about what you as an individual intend to do with your future. And you go and practice those tools. So we just do the simple stuff at the front end. It's peer-led, as we've touched on. There is a real, often an unfair accusation from people who say, you don't understand where I've been, you can't possibly help, etc., etc. But one of the reasons we can make our course mercifully short is that we play that card straight away. So a largely unfair objection is dealt with straight away. I do understand how you've been that. I do understand how this thing talks in your head. And I do have tools that work for me. Do you fancy sitting here for 10 hours and listening to me? And that fundamentally is our value proposition to those learners. And through it all lies that idea of self-reliance. I think it's great when people question what more do they need. Because until somebody says, have I got the tools now? And answers that in a positive, they will always be in treatment. There has to be a point where we cut that. And I think in treatment it's almost in our DNA not to let go, isn't it? Some of the recovery movement is beginning to look like tier 5 of the treatment system. And I would question the value of that. So, to touch specifically on Addaction, which we were always keen to do, we work with Addaction up and down the country in small or large ways, but most of our work centres around Liverpool with a Project Exodus that we're just launching, which is a really exciting piece of work aimed in shared care, 4-year plus cohort of largely methadone, but typically using quite heavily on top a fair different sort of cocktail of drugs. And our remit there, it's quite a challenge, but our remit there is to literally walk people out of treatment drug-free in 3 to 6 months. I'd love an hour to talk about it, but David's already looking at me like with that look on my face. So, Walsall, another area we've been in with 18 months, and I mean, I've seen some of the Walsall people here. Our welcome in Walsall is almost unprecedented in drug treatment, to the extent where they ram my classrooms full. I've got people coming out of holes in the side and doorways and all sorts. We've got the exact opposite problem. But again, it's been embraced as a method that sits within their own treatment that they're delivering. Cheshire Addaction's been long-standing. We have a good working relationship with them. And on the horizon, we hope to be working in Lincoln very soon with you guys across the county there. And I know that we're bidding with Cumbria. We're very, very keen to work with any of you, and if any of you are from an area that we're not engaged with or just don't know about us, you must have seen my big stand. It's the only one there, isn't it? Well, I'll finish by saying thank you very much for listening to me. As I say, I'm around in the the drink area at any time you want to talk, and thank you.